Welcome to Library Seminars, a platform for the presentation of ideas, research, and news in support of NOAA's mission. I'm Lisa Clark, Reference Librarian at the NOAA Central Library. Today's webinar, Organized Chaos, Social Media, Severe Weather, and Disaster Management, is sponsored by the National Weather Service and brought to you by Vankita Brown, social scientist and researcher at National Weather Service, who unfortunately could not be here today. Vankita learned of the work of our speakers at a National Science Foundation event and invited them to share it with the NOAA and emergency management communities in today's webinar. The University at Albany, in partnership with other universities and government agencies in the United States and Taiwan, is using social media data to explore public attention, risk perception, and communication related to acute and diffuse hazards. University at Albany's student-led and expert-guided virtual operations support team called VOST, is working with emergency managers to deploy these findings directly into the field through just-in-time and after-action reporting. Dr. Amber Silver and Derek Morrison are here to tell us more about this program. Dr. Amber Silver is an assistant professor at the University at Albany's College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity. She is also Principal Investigator for the university's Crisis Informatics Lab and VOST. Her research focuses on risk communication and the ways individuals and groups make decisions before, during, and after high-impact weather. Dr. Silver is currently exploring decision-making related to both acute and diffuse hazards, including Hurricane Dorian and COVID-19. Derek Morrison is the Chief of Staff at University at Albany's National Center for Security and Preparedness. He manages VOST and is a subject matter expert in open source information collection and intelligence. His experience includes 5 years in the New York State Governor's Office and 5 years as a United States Marine with 3 deployments in Iraq, Afghanistan, other Middle East countries, and Europe. Before I turn the mic over to our speakers, who I'm very happy to have today here with us, I want to remind you that this presentation is being recorded and will be available on the NOAA Central Library YouTube channel by later this afternoon. We will also be accepting questions throughout the webinar, which the speakers will address at the end of their presentation. Please feel free to type your questions into the question chat box, which is located in your control panel, represented by the orange arrow, which should be somewhere to the right. Please feel free to download our speakers' slides located under handouts in the control panel as well. And with that very last detail, I pass the mic to Amber and Derek.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for that introduction, and thank everybody for attending our presentation. Again, I'm Derek Morrison, and with me is Dr. Silver. Just go over a quick agenda of how our PowerPoint is organized here. We're going to talk about who we are, although Lisa just did a great job introducing us. I'll provide an overview of the project, and then I'll turn it over to Dr. Silver to talk about the research she is working on related to public decision-making. And then it'll come back to me to talk about our virtual operations support team and how we're implementing and executing the concept. Dr. Silver, are you ready to move forward?
I am, thank you. So as was mentioned, my name is Dr. Amber Silver. I'm an assistant professor in the College of Emergency Preparedness, Homeland Security, and Cybersecurity. I am a social scientist by training. So most of my research is within the domain of risk and crisis communication. More specifically, I'm interested in the ways that end users obtain, interpret, and respond to official and unofficial warning information in the context of extreme weather. Derek?
Thank you. So, in addition to what Lisa mentioned at the beginning of the presentation, I'll just highlight a couple of things that really enable me to kind of do the work we do with VOST. My second deployment was with a Marine Expeditionary Unit where we traveled around Europe and the Middle East into various countries. This was in 2008. We didn't have a lot of intelligence collections assets in various countries. So when our unit was responding to things like humanitarian responses or assisting embassies or diplomatic missions, we relied on a lot of open source information to build our situational awareness and our intelligence picture. So at that deployment is really when I learned a lot about open source intelligence and open source information, how it kind of applies to the real world. As I moved through my career and then I went on to the governor's office, I was actually appointed the chief research analyst, where We did rapid response research related to anything under the sun. It could be policy, it could have been legal, it could have been legislative, it could have been security related research, where we really built out a platform of collecting accurate and rapid information and disseminating it to decision makers very quickly. And that helped further my skill set along that, where I led a team there. Those are really kind of two things where I helped build out a lot of my skill sets for this, which I'll talk about how I apply those to the VOST world and allow the VOST, enable the VOST to operate in a very rapid response measure. Just to give an overview of the project, the two elements we're going to talk about with Dr. Silver's research and then with VOST actually fall under the U.S.-Taiwan Partnerships for International Research and Education project. This is actually the last year of the project. It is a National Science Foundation project that's funded through them. The project in itself has several different elements to it. It has four main goals, though. One being to improve the understanding of climate impact on extreme events in the northeastern region of the United States and also East Asia, specifically Taiwan. Another one is to study the predictability of the weather events. And then the two that really focus on the work we do is to improve decision-making by emergency managers based on probabilistic data, which there was a presentation given to a couple of our partners, Dr. Terry Adams with Howard University and Jason Cradaville with the National Center for Security and Preparedness last month in December, which NOAA Central Library posted to their YouTube account. So if you guys get a chance and you want to read about their work, I recommend viewing it. It was severe weather and risk management decision-making. SWARM, it's a course we're developing, and it also talked about the research that Howard University is doing and how it's feeding back into the training we're developing for emergency managers. So that's on YouTube. Take a look if you get a chance. And then in addition, the fourth goal is to provide interdisciplinary training for the next generation of experts in all of the areas. Specifically, we laid out some objectives for the work we're doing and we're talking about here today. One of them is to amplify research on trends in weather extremes, by operationalizing it, by seeing the research as it plays out in higher education, operationalizing ensemble techniques for providing weather guidance, and then improving the efficacy of decision-making and response by emergency managers. And we'll talk about how the research we're doing and how VOST enables those things. Again, this project wraps up in August of this year. Ultimately, what happens next with the project is to be determined. We're working on student experience elements of it and branching off into other research proposals from it. Dr. Silver?
Thank you very much. So as Derek mentioned, the Virtual Operations Support Team rose out of this PIRE grant. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the VOST concept, but for those of you who are not, VOST is essentially a student-led, faculty-supervised initiative whereby undergraduate students are monitoring social media in real time during breaking events. That could be a severe weather outbreak, it could be an active shooter situation, it could be a mass casualty event, whatever have you. And they're gathering information about information trends. So whether that is what accounts are most active, what hashtags are being used, what misinformation exists out there, and then they're compiling all that information into a report for our community partners. Now, when we were developing the VOST for the University at Albany, we wanted to be sure that it was grounded both in good practice and good theory. And so in order to do that, we turned to research on risk and crisis communication. So as most of you are aware, I'm sure, crisis communication involves the sending and receiving of messages intended to reduce and contain harm and enhance recovery. Now, there exists an emerging and robust literature on crisis communication, over the last 15 to 20 years or so, that examines the role of social media as a crisis communications tool. However, while a great deal of time and effort has gone into examining the content of messages, so for example, what is being shared, by whom, and when, far less is understood about how that information actually influences behavior. In an effort to understand whether and how socially mediated crisis communication influences protective action decision-making, research was conducted in September and October 2019 on Hurricane Dorian. More specifically, we sought to understand how information shared through Twitter influences preparedness and response among Atlantic Canadians. Next, please. Next, please. Thank you. In an effort to understand whether and how socially media, sorry, as I'm sure you're all aware, oh, sorry, Derek, would you be able to go back one slide? I apologize, you jumped forward too. Perfect. As I'm sure you're all aware, Hurricane Dorian formed on August 24th, 2019. It was quickly forecasted to affect the eastern coast of the United States and Canada. Shortly thereafter, states of emergency and/or evacuation orders were issued for Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and Virginia. Sure enough, the storm followed up the eastern seaboard, and then it actually made landfall in the Halifax Regional Municipality on September 7th, 2019. The storm resulted in widespread damage across the province, including power outages that affected over 80% of the population, in addition to storm surge damage, wind damage, and so on. Now, there was some concern among forecasters that early confusion about predicted intensity, so whether it was going to be a Category 1 or a Category 2, and Sharpiegate, which was happening in the United States, might actually undermine trust or confidence in hurricane forecasts from the Canadian Hurricane Center and from Environment Canada. Next, please. Thank you. As such, we developed a questionnaire instrument and disseminated it using Qualtrics to 3,200 residents of Atlantic Canada. We included quotas for provincial size, population size, gender, and age. The final sample size after non-responses, incompletes, and cleaning of data was 1,343 respondents. Now, this questionnaire included questions on perceptions of information, misinformation and gossip, trust and credibility, information searching and sharing behaviors, and influence on preparedness decisions. Next, please. Thank you. Now, Figure 1 shows the results to a series of 5-point Likert scale questions regarding perceptions of storm-related information. In general, the storm was thought to be well forecast and its impacts well predicted, with 85 to 90% of respondents agreeing or strongly agreeing with these statements. Accordingly, most respondents disagreed with the sentiment that Hurricane Dorian was overhyped, and approximately 60% of the sample disagreed or strongly disagreed with the statement. I felt overwhelmed by the amount of storm-related information being shared about the storm. These are both two really important points. Firstly, the fact that Hurricane Dorian wasn't thought to be overhyped is important because there was some confusion about whether it was going to make landfall as a Category 1 or a Category 2. So the fact that people felt that there was no overhype or there was no cry wolf going on is really good. Secondly, the fact that people didn't feel overwhelmed by the amount of storm-related information being shared is also important, because one of the common criticisms that's levied at social media is the volume of information that's being shared, and the concern that people will become so overwhelmed with information that they're seeing that they'll just shut down and stop paying attention. So for Hurricane Dorian, at least, that was not the case. Next slide. When asked about information sources, approximately 85% of respondents agreed or strongly agreed with the statement, "I trusted information on Twitter that came from government sources more than information from non-governmental sources." And they agreed that information found on Twitter was credible and helped in their decision-making. Respondents were also asked about the prevalence of misinformation or gossip on Twitter. Approximately 80% of people agreed or strongly agreed that they felt confident in being able to identify misinformation. However, they were less likely to have seen people actually correct information or to have corrected misinformation themselves. This is perhaps because 60% of respondents disagreed with the sentiment that "I thought misinformation or gossip about Hurricane Dorian was common on Twitter," and the sentiment "I felt that misinformation or gossip about Hurricane Dorian on Twitter was a big problem." So to summarize, respondents in this survey generally thought the storm and its impacts were well forecasted. They thought information on Twitter was credible, especially information from government sources. And they felt information shared on Twitter helped respondents make good decisions to protect themselves, their households, and their properties. Next. When we asked we also asked why people shared information and searched for information. So the reasons for searching for information is on the left, and the reasons for sharing information is on the right. Pardon me. So when we asked why people searched for information on Twitter, there were two prominent reasons. One, people felt that information was up to date, and two, they thought information was accessible. Less people thought that, they specifically searched for information because it was trustworthy or it was more reliable than other sources. So generally, the idea is that this information is up to date and it's accessible. When we asked why did they share information, there was quite the spread. So some people said they shared information because they just thought that other people needed to know it. They might have said that they thought the information was interesting or that it could help other people make good decisions. Some people said that they wanted to help other people, and other people thought that the information was personally useful to them, so it might be useful to others. Next. Lastly, we asked respondents what information they were searching for and sharing. Storm conditions, so for example, wind speed, storm surge, rainfall, landfall information, such as its timing and location, and videos or pictures of the storms and its impacts were the three main reasons for both searching behaviors and sharing behaviors. Information about evacuations, recommended protective actions, and interviews with officials were less common, but still relatively prevalent. Next, please. So these results were underscored in the open-ended questions that were also on the survey. Participants were asked about how Twitter was used to prepare for the storm. Of 604 respondents that answered the question on preparedness, 580, or 96%, explicitly and emphatically indicated that Twitter influenced their preparedness decisions, either alone or in conjunction with other sources. Only 24 respondents, or 3.9%, indicated that Twitter didn't influence their preparedness decisions at all. In general, responses indicated that information shared on Twitter encouraged respondents to gather emergency supplies, so things like food and water or batteries or gas for the generator, and also indicated that it helped them prepare their homes and properties prior to landfall. So for example, some respondents said that they cut dead branches off of trees or even cut entire trees down. Others said that they took in lawn furniture or patio furniture, and some even said that they went so far as sandbagging their properties. Next. As with the closed-ended questions, the open-ended or the qualitative results also underscore the desirability of information about landfall location and timing, storm conditions, and potential impacts. So for example, some respondents said that local news media, it just wasn't specific enough for them or for their community. So they turned to Twitter to get more specific information. Others said that Twitter was always up to date, it was on demand, and it was accessible. They didn't have to wait for the news to come on or for an announcement to come out from the government. If they needed information right away, they could turn to Twitter to find that. So that that sentiment is echoed or shown here with the first respondent, who is a 60 to 69-year-old female, who said, "I felt that due to the uncertainty of exactly where landfall would be made and the amount of rain and wind speeds, Twitter allowed more of a specific warning that while we would get excessive amounts of rain, we didn't need to make as much an effort to prepare for wind." That sentiment echoed with a 60 to 69-year-old female respondent who said, "The storm was only forecast to cause high winds without a lot of precipitation. The forecasts shared on Twitter were very informative in giving me this information and letting me know I wouldn't be in its direct path." Next. Thanks. Respondents also indicated frequently that pictures and videos of the impacts shared on Twitter actually spurred them to take protective action. So for instance, one respondent, a 60 to 69-year-old female, said that watching the many videos of Hurricane Dorian on Twitter showing the strength of the storm, damages to properties, fallen down trees, floods, power outages, helped me prepare for dangerous situations by closing windows, getting flashlights, candles, keeping the cell phone charged. purchasing extra food and supplies, and working with neighbors to make sure we helped each other. Again, another respondent, a 50 to 59-year-old female, agrees, who said, Twitter gave me a clearer picture of when Hurricane Dorian would make landfall and what to expect from wind and rain in my area. The pictures posted gave me a more accurate idea of what to expect for possible damage. And this idea of people turning to Twitter for pictures of, storm surge and rain and damages that had already occurred, both in Atlantic Canada, the United States, and elsewhere, was a recurring and prevalent theme. Next, please, Derek. Thank you. Another trend that emerged in the data is this notion of social pressure to prepare for the storm. So in other words, some respondents indicated they actually had no intention of preparing for Hurricane Dorian until they saw their friends and their family and their community members on Twitter chatting about all the preparations that they were going to be doing. And then they thought, oh, well, maybe I should actually go ahead and do so as well. So for example, this 18 to 29-year-old respondent to Mail said, seeing how everyone else was preparing, particularly at the grocery stores by media posts on Twitter, I felt internal pressure to prepare myself. That sentiment's echoed with a 30 to 39-year-old male respondent who said, knowing what other people did or had to do got me in the mindset of what preparedness level I needed to be, and so on. Next, please. Now, although a small portion of respondents did indicate they didn't take any preparedness measures, Twitter was actually also shown to influence those decisions as well. So for example, an 18 to 29-year-old male respondent said, you know what, after viewing the forecast of the hurricane on Twitter, I decided I didn't need to prepare for the storm because it was forecasted to affect the northern peninsula of Newfoundland far more than my community. That's, agreed with a 60 to 69-year-old female respondent who said, the information on Twitter showed that there were no watches or warnings for my area. I kept track on Twitter in case that changed, but I didn't make any special preparations based on this information. So, sorry, next, please. Thanks. So earlier I introduced this concept of the virtual operations support team. And I said that we turned to the risk and crisis communication literature to ensure that it was grounded both in good practice and in good theory. You may be asking yourself, okay, well why? What benefit could a VOST have for my institution or my organization? Well, the answer is that Twitter specifically and social media in general has been shown to have a demonstrable effect on risk perception, information seeking and sharing behaviors, and with this study on Hurricane Dorian, protective action decision making. It's therefore important to understand what information is being shared and by whom before, during, and after a high impact event. And the student-led, faculty-supervised VOST initiative provides the capacity to do just that. And with that, I'll turn it over to Derek.
Thank you, Dr. Silver. So the concept of a virtual operations support team is not a new concept. We didn't invent the concept. In fact, many members of our audience today have probably participated in VOST, led one, or maybe interacted with a volunteer VOST within a crowdsourcing kind of platform. Again, we took the concept as it's worked in the emergency management community. A professor that worked at CEHC, the Homeland Security College, with us is a deputy commissioner at New York State's Division of Homeland Security Emergency Services. He serves as an adjunct professor. He partnered with a student and wrote a paper about forming and creating this VOST concept within a student core here at the university. And what we did was we took what they wrote in the paper and applied it to work under this umbrella that was PIRE, and then combined it with Dr. Silver's research as she's already laid out for us. Initially, we only partnered with the New York State Division of Homeland Security in their office. We expanded that since then. We've worked with the New York National Guard, and we've reached out to other agencies, both within New York State and outside of New York State, to talk about this model and assisting other agencies within theirs. So we're not just limited to New York State and New York State's Division of Homeland Security. Ultimately, the goal of this program with students is to provide just-in-time reporting to our partner agencies during select activations. We'll compile social media reports, after action reports, kind of summarizing public perception, areas for growth, and the use of social media to communicate with the public, while also exploring best practices of use of social media during major incidents. So that'll be tying back some of the research Dr. Silver does, Howard University is doing, other partner universities within the PIRE project, and then other academic research that we come across during our work that we compare in. Just to emphasize a couple things, the Homeland Security College here at Albany really has a key tenet of experiential learning. So this VOST helps us enable that key tenet so students can, experience emergency management, they can participate in emergency management, and then build job skills and build out their resumes at the same time. And these are students who have a vested interest in what's going on. This isn't just crowdsourcing with the general internet and dealing with some of the challenges associated with that. The students at the same time, they complete training and internships requirements, which are part of their degree programs. Some other examples of this are the Colorado VOST, which I actually think might have just stood down. Scotland has a VOST. Humanity Road is a nonprofit example. There's a lot of different ones. They might go by the terms VOAD. They exist in different concepts there. One of the key parts of ours, which I'll talk about a little bit more, is the multidisciplinary element of it. And I'll talk about that a little bit more. And just to kind of point out one thing in this picture here, we were doing a marketing shoot for the university to help recruit students and periodicals that were going out. This is actually right when New York State did its emergency activation for the COVID outbreak, and students were already working on that. And I'll talk about COVID and what our team did during that situation in a little bit. So how is our team formed here? Our composition generally is 4 to 6 members. We have 4 right now. It's, upper level students in graduate programs or about to graduate, obviously in good standing with good grades, from the Homeland Security College, either studying emergency preparedness, Homeland Security, cybersecurity, and then we also partner with our Department of Atmospheric Sciences and Environmental Scientists, so our weather students, to be part of the team also. A lot of our students studying atmospheric sciences actually minor in emergency management also, so it works very, very well. This summer, we'll be expanding to include other universities, including Howard University, our partners in Taiwan, to hopefully give us a little either a wider national coverage or international coverage too. So to date, we did our soft launch in December of 2019. We've had 3 cohorts go through already. We're on our 4th cohort now. We had 1 major activation that was for COVID in March of last year. We'll talk about that. And so far, we've tracked over 16 incidents, and that's still ongoing. That number is increasing with over 7 social media reports, and we've done 1 after action report, 2 to date, not as part of activations, but as part of our steady states. Just some additional information. Our VOST and the way we set it up, they all are certified through the Department of Homeland Security's ICS and NIM certifications. So they have full understanding of how that world works and to be able to talk the language. They're also certified through DHS's social media and emergency management. And then also they complete the National Institute of Health's social media analysis during disasters. In addition, Dr. Silver builds a wide range of academic research, public periodicals, and research related to crisis communications that students all have to read and consume, process that information, and then provide, analysis of that back to Dr. Silver, who kind of lets them know, gives them feedback on what they're reading and what their thoughts are related to that. So that's generally how we train and comprise our team and what we've done so far. Operationally, the team exists in 2 phases. We use a steady state, which is our standard normal day-to-day operations. That's where we focus on training our team members, interacting with other agencies, perhaps, setting up workshops for students to learn additional tools and techniques. We'll build practice reports because practice makes perfect. We're constantly refining our skill because we know speed is of the essence, and that's really where we're going to bring an additional skill set to the table, is being able to consume that information fast, process it, and get reports back to the partners, in our process. And we're also going to maintain situational awareness while we're going. So we're monitoring things as they're going on, not just in New York, but in other parts of the United States, and then internationally also as we see it come across. Our second phase is an activation phase. All of our operations are built using the Department of Homeland Security's template for a volunteer program. So what that does is that outlines roles, responsibilities. It outlines an activation process. It establishes a chain of command, tasks that must be done. And we built that out to, one, to help set our steady state and set our activation states, but then also to be able to put that in place with a partner agency when they reach out to us to activate. The primary point of contact in a lot of our process right now is set up to work with agencies, PIOs, the public information officers, but that's not always the case. And I'll talk about a different example that came up where we didn't partner with the PIO, partnered with a different element of the emergency response. A little bit more. So what do our products kind of look like? And it might be tough for some of you to see. Again, we put the handout in the slide or in the meeting program there where you can download and take a look at it. This is just a template to kind of show you the idea. We always start with a social media summary up front. The idea of putting the summary up front really draws back to the emergency management's world, to desire to consume the most critical pieces of information in the fastest way possible. So a lot of times you'll hear this kind of referred to as a bluff, and that's what we do with the summary in our formats. And then from there, we're going to move into a forecast or significant events, depending on what type of event we're monitoring. That's really just a focus on the facts of the events to give somebody a brief overview or context before they read the social media information. And then we're going to give the hashtags and keywords. Will help, the emergency management agency we're partnering with to narrow things down on their side and have their PIO focus and kind of direct communications to certain areas as needed. And then we're going to talk about engagement. So what's happening on social media? How are their communications being perceived as they've gone out? What's the reaction to them? What kind of social media impressions are they generating? And, one thing I'll just draw in here, while Dr. Silver pointed out Twitter being a major resource on this, our team looks, more than just Twitter. We're looking at Facebook, we're looking at Instagram, we're looking at, emerging social media platforms as they pop up too, to keep an eye to make sure that, there isn't any relevant topics that are popping up from those angles either. And then lastly is our analysis section. This is really the most important part of the section. This is where we take that research that Dr. Silver is doing, or Howard University is doing, or other partners in the academic world or higher education, and tie it back to what we see happening on social media, and hopefully offer some good feedback and create a feedback loop to where people are kind of getting a live return on their communication as it goes out. Excuse me, I'm just taking a drink here. We use a couple tools to do this. As I mentioned, we're on all the major social media platforms. We use TweetDeck a lot of time. It really helps us narrow down searches. It does a lot of location-based searching, which really helps us kind of move beyond the top level topics on social media and get to the ground level, and especially, specific areas that might not be as prominent on social media. We'll also take a look at things like Google Trends. What are people searching for? How does that tie back to social media? And then one of the other things we really emphasize in our social media reports is misinformation and disinformation. A lot of that stems from my personal background. So students are trained on finding original sources, verifying information that's going on social media. So they use a lot of Boolean search operators to track information down. We do things like reverse image searches to verify, image integrity, where it came from, see if we can find the original source, see if it's been modified. And then we use various bot checkers. Primarily, we use the one from the University of Indiana's Social Media Observatory to check things, for probability on whether it's a bot account or not. And you can see a lot of trends on social media and how they kind of influence the discussion on social media as it's happening if there are bots involved. Excuse me. Just to talk about one of the social media trends back up that we've seen with bots related, especially in the last year or 2 years or so, we've seen a lot of what we call language independence, and that's going to be social media accounts that their tweets are formed in a way that it's easily translated to various multiple languages across the internet without needing a person. So that'll be simplified language to where, a piece of software can translate a piece of social media into another language and share it in a faster manner. It's just an interesting thing we see happen on a lot of social media platforms I wanted to point out while we're on here. The other type of product we use with our partners is an after action report. This is very different than a lot of after action reports you might see in your professional capacity. The idea with this after action report is really it's a rapid after action report. So what we're going to do is focus on either a specific aspect of the response, and the goal is to have that report out within 7 to 10 days of the event, or at least that specific aspect of the response we're working on. We're going to take a look mainly from a lessons learned areas for improvement perspective. So we'll focus in on that misinformation, disinformation that went out, how it got corrected, how people responded to it, the communication flow. So those emergency warnings as they went out, the various storm information as it goes out, and then how people are reacting to it. Are they disseminating it further? And then also the engagement aspect of it. Were there major topics that were missed or were things that were perceived incorrectly, and then how adjustments can be made. And again, the key component here is to get it out rapid so that people, emergency managers, the next disaster doesn't wait on you to complete an after action report that's 50, 60 pages long, that you brought in a consulting firm to help you do it and conduct interviews. But you do need some elements of it to help you make decisions before the next disaster happens, or if it's already happened, so you can adjust your decisions as the next disaster is already unfolding, before you have a chance to really sit down and look back at the events. Just to go through a couple examples of some of the work we've done over the last year and a half, we've done one of the early examples of our reports. This is shortly after we formed in December of 2019. We had a very minor earthquake in South Glens Falls in upstate New York, only a 3.1. The social media posts were up within 2 minutes of the geological instruments detecting the earthquake. It occurred across all social media platforms in a rapid manner. And within an hour of that, emergency management agencies were already using Twitter to confirm the earthquake and provide situational updates, one, to people asking, but then also to get information back, whether that is related to roads being out, bridges in need of repair, any kind of damage assessments that might be off the area. So that was an easier way for the emergency managers in that area to get that information out, and then also to get information back from the rest of the area as they saw it. There's not likely that we would have the VOST stood up within minutes of an earthquake. It doesn't work necessarily that. We do have a wide range of operational hours, so we probably would be online at some point monitoring the situation. Again, if the situation had happened before a VOST would be activated, they could come online very quickly and help that emergency management organization come online themselves when they're moving to an activation state. Our major activation last year was actually for COVID-19. It wasn't even a weather-related event. And there was a lot of lessons learned that came out of this one for our team. Our team specifically actually began tracking COVID-19 as it appeared on social media out of China in December of 2019. So we're already getting a picture that this was a major deal from there as early as 2019. Because we saw it start to emerge in other countries, and even those initial cases in the United States, we started to prepare reports in January of 2020. A lot of what we saw on social media was really focused on misinformation and disinformation, especially related to anti-Chinese sentiment on social media. So that was a lot of the kind of content we were seeing and tracking at that point. As I mentioned in the picture at the beginning of the presentation, we were actually activated by New York State's Division of Homeland Security to assist them. We were actually activated specifically to assist their recovery operations within their EOC as it came online. And as you can tell, this was March 12th to March 20th. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. We completed 3 reports over that 8-day period. The recovery section actually tasked the VOST to focus specifically on social media related to higher education and vulnerable populations. We really wanted to get an idea of what was happening at colleges kind of across the state, how students were moving around and those things. Obviously, as a college-based organization, it worked very well from there. And then also looking at vulnerable populations, what was being said, to those, whether it was related to elderly, disabled, any of those types of population groups on social media, and how the information was actually reaching those individuals on there. Obviously, a big takeaway from this incident was probably a little too early to be involved with a recovery section, as we are still ongoing with COVID at this time, and the recovery section somewhat stood down from DHSES at that point. So our services weren't necessarily needed at that point. But some of our big takeaways that we learned from working with them was really working on, our team helped enable deconfliction of information, especially with the full-time staff that was monitoring the situation. So, they didn't have time to kind of see how that public was perceiving that information as it went out. So we gave them that feedback to help deconflict and help provide them, refine their information as it went out. There was also work being done by consultants related to social media that was being done to, from a broad perspective, and given to DHSES from a wider perspective. So this helped, couple with that information to give a more refined picture on social media related to the two categories we were asked to monitor. And then also one of our other big takeaways from this was really, even at only a few pages long, our emergency management partners were very adamant about just getting that bottom line up front and focusing on the key essential information. So if they only have 1 minute to read that report, that they can take away those couple bullets, process them, and be able to implement actions from them. So that was our COVID activation in March. The next event I'll kind of talk about here is Hurricane Laura. Hurricane Laura was actually during a steady state for us. There was no activation, so we used this as a chance to build our first kind of rapid after action report. We narrowed it down to the first 48, 72-hour window before and after landfall. And this was a major kind of event on social media, and a lot to learn from. I'm sure some of you know this very well, is the key findings were very interesting for this one, because there was a lot going on nationally that impacted what was happening on social media that wasn't related to Hurricane Laura. Specifically, this was when a lot of the protests and civil unrest were happening in Kenosha, Wisconsin, and subsequent additional civil unrest in various parts of the country. So almost none of the Hurricane Laura related information was in the top trending of topics. It wasn't jumping to the top of individual social media feeds. So there was kind of a lot to be analyzed from there. We had a report out in about 7 days after that 72-hour window we looked at. But a couple things that just to point out that we came across when we were looking at it. Obviously, it was not part of the trending topics as it came across social media. Some of our lessons learned would be partnering with more prominent social media accounts to help get the messaging out, especially in the areas with Hurricane Laura, who had just been hit by a storm in rapid succession there. The other thing we saw was weather organizations such as Weather Channel had much more engagement than local government officials, other government agencies and weather agencies in that area weren't getting the same level of traction, especially on social media. And part of that contributing was what was going on around the rest of the nation too at the same time. The other, and probably one of the most interesting things that came about this thing was the National Hurricane Center's unsurvivable tweet, and using that specific language related to survivable. So just to give you some context, the social media during Hurricane Laura when compared to, say, Hurricane Dorian. So Hurricane Dorian had its most popular tweet was about 13,000 likes, whereas even this National Hurricane Center unsurvivable tweet, which was by far and away the most popular tweet during the hurricane, only received 7,800 likes. So it had about half the engagement of even the most notable Hurricane Dorian topic at the same time. Another example would be, the Weather Channel's tweet that quoted the unsurvivable tweet accumulated 12,000 retweets and 19,000 likes. And prior tweets related to the National Hurricane stating life-threatening and extremely dangerous and devastating using that type of language only received 3,000 retweets and 2,900 likes combined. So as you can see, for some reason, this word unsurvivable really just reverberated across social media, and definitely offers kind of a valuable lesson to be learned here in how you can use certain language to either increase your spread, modify your spread, target your spread as needed during all this time. And a lot of this we can feed back to agencies as they're putting information out in a very rapid manner. And so if the academic research says, yes, this is good in this type of situation, or no, this is bad in this type of situation, that's really where the research and policy tie-in can come back into play. So just to kind of really summarize before we jump into questions, Dr. Silva really emphasized her work in Hurricane Dorian and how respondents to the survey were perceiving Twitter and messaging as it went across Twitter, and we're using it as kind of an effective way to gather information and appropriately determine what response they needed based on the storm coming in. VOST, we talked about VOST and our implementation of VOST being a multidisciplinary volunteer, and then how we've partnered with emergency management agencies to provide just-in-time reporting in both social media reports and after-action reports. And then also, just to kind of come back, our project's wrapping up in August of this year, and our next steps are going to be kind of looking to continue the student experiential model within the college, and then also continue research and branch off our research. So it'll be moving beyond PIRE and what the goals and objectives of that program are, and to apply it to different worlds. So I think at this time, Lisa, we'll open it up for questions. I'm going to switch over to our contact page so folks can write that down, but we can go ahead and move into the question phase of this presentation.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Amber and Derek. That was really, really fascinating. Audience, we have about 14 minutes to answer your questions. So if you have one, please type it into the questions box and I will read them to Amber and Derek. This is also a good time to download the slides from today's presentation, which is located under handouts in the control panel. And last but not least, before I start the questions, I'd like to remind you that this seminar is being recorded. So if you have a colleague you think might enjoy this presentation, please send them the recording. You can find the link to that at the NOAA Central Library YouTube channel later this afternoon. So people have been sending questions, and I'm going to start with the first one. What are the similarities and differences between the VOST concept and the crisis mapping movement that emerged after events like the Haiti earthquake?
I'll just kind of respond really quickly. So the question is related to the differences between, the crisis mapping related to the Haiti emergency and then what we have done on the VOST. I can honestly say, I'll have to look into that and kind of get back on that question. I'm not too familiar what they're doing with the Haiti one or which specific emergency they're referring to down in the Haiti one. But I'll take a look and I'll get back to that individual on that and kind of compare and contrast, see if there's differences. If I had to guess, probably not a lot. It's, the biggest thing ours has from the VOST model as a whole is it's really student-led and student experience. So it's less crowdsourcing based. So you have a little bit more of a membership that is comprised of students who are more informed of what the emergency management world looks like and how they operate. So it's kind of a mutually beneficial relationship from that aspect. So you have somewhat of I don't want to say a better, but a different, more emergency management focused participant.
Excellent, thank you. And we do forward all questions to our speakers, so that we'll get to you later on, Derek. The next question asks, how did you ensure the sample size of respondents was representative of the entire population? And how was the survey conducted, i.e. paper form, online, over phone? I'm always interested in knowing the full process so I can improve my own work.
Great question. So we used Qualtrics, which is a service that digitizes questionnaires. So the questionnaires were disseminated online to a Qualtrics panel. So they have many, many, many different people who have agreed to fill out surveys if it's sent to them. And so essentially what we did was that we brought up the census population for Atlantic Canada, which is Nova Scotia, New Brunswick, Prince Edward Island, and Newfoundland. And therefore we were able to set quotas for each population each province based on the population, gender, and age. And then Qualtrics has the ability to target those individuals. So they know from their panel that they have, however many people, however many women in the 20 to 29 range who indicate that they live in Nova Scotia. And so they targeted those individuals until those quotas were met, and then they moved on to other quotas.
That's great. Thank you for answering that question, Amber. This next question asks, has the concept for VOST been shared with FEMA? The FEMA Corps, part of AmeriCorps, would be a great place to initiate this effort.
So the VOST model has definitely been shared with FEMA. Again, as DHS has actually set a lot of the guidelines related to volunteer organizations. What you'll see is a lot of implementations work on the regional aspect of it or directly with states. I mentioned the Colorado VOST. Another one you might see that's not necessarily affiliated directly with the state is Humanitarian Road. They're a nonprofit network of volunteers who, partner with various agencies across it. But I have no doubt that FEMA is already aware of it. The AmeriCorps, with its volunteer aspect of it, would probably implement a lot of these concepts already. But I don't know if they've actually touched on a lot of the VOST concepts with what the work AmeriCorps is doing and their response. But I know FEMA is already tracking on it and already has implementations of it in various levels.
Great, thank you. That was a great question. We have another question here that asks, what programs do you use to track hashtags across platforms?
So we use between Google Trends, which is publicly available as one, is a really good one to track it across different social media platforms. And then one of our primary ones within Twitter is we use TweetDeck, which TweetDeck gives you a lot of different options. If you're not already using it, it's a tool offered by Twitter, which you can do modifications of searches, narrow things down by locations, regions, by terms. It has Boolean search operators, which work very well too. So you can modify your search results to get a lot more focused and more nuanced result than just say typing into Twitter search and seeing what results pop up. Hope that helps.
Yeah, that was great. Actually, I'm always happy to hear about Boolean. It's something we use in the library all the time. So far, that was the last question. I'm going to give another minute to the audience so that if you do have a question, and this is a great opportunity to ask our speakers directly. Did you have any last comments, Amber or Derek, before we end our program today?
Just again to express appreciation for being able to present today, because VOST it's not brand new. As Derek mentioned, it's popped up at different places around the country. But with the University at Albany, the way that we're moving forward, one of the biggest differences, as Derek mentioned, is these students all have a background in atmospheric science or emergency management or Homeland Security or cybersecurity. And they're also, this is not a temporary position. So our students, they come in as sort of like junior members where they're mentored by students who've been around for 2, 3, 4 semesters. And then even after students graduate out of the program, they still are here and mentoring students and passing on that knowledge. So it's not as though we have a new cohort every single semester and we're constantly training our students to learn how to do this. Instead, it's this very fluid dynamic where we have new students coming in that are being mentored by students who have been here for a while and even students who have graduated out of the program.
Yeah, that's actually a great point that I meant to emphasize is the program really creates a big feedback loop. So when our students move on to their full-time professional positions, they always have the ability, one, to reach back and kind of see what's going on in the higher education world, but then at the same time to feed back information to us on what's going on, in their careers and their jobs and what they're seeing, and help train and keep everybody up to date from that perspective. Just next week we're working with a graduate of UAlbany who's going to talk to the team about the latest and greatest in open source information gathering and collection on social media. And he works for a private security company that does security analysis for private companies based on social media and social media. So they have clients from there. So they're going to give us that feedback of kind of what they're seeing, what they're going on. We've had students that have moved on to work for other companies or work with Homeland Security agencies that will always reach out to kind of create that feedback loop to give us the latest and greatest on techniques and information and what people are seeing. Thanks for bringing that up. I forgot about that.
Excellent. Well, someone asked me to repeat the word Boolean. So I just wanted to say Boolean searching was that was great. Thank you so much. It looks like that might be our last question. So I'd like to conclude by thanking you both for sharing your research and VOST with us today, and to Venkita Brown for organizing this event and bringing you here to library seminars. NOAA Central Library is very proud to present the work of the NOAA community and its partners, and I truly appreciate that you joined us today. So be well, everybody.